G'day, g'day. Welcome to Pints with Aquinas. My name is Matt Fradd, and these are my new mic arms. Don't they look cool? Look at them. Low-profile mic arms that Catholic Jamie installed. Look at that. It's just terrific. I'm loving this so much. Good to see you. I'm not seeing you. Good to have you. Today we want to talk about the offensive things Thomas Aquinas had to say about modesty. Now, truth be told, I don't find these offensive, but it seems to me today that you can't speak about what you ought not to do in the realm of sexuality without causing tremendous offense today. Even something like this. This will be the most offensive thing said throughout the whole show. You probably shouldn't dress like a slut. I would think that's pretty innocuous, really. I mean, shouldn't we all agree on that? However you dress, just don't dress like in a way that people think you're a prostitute. So that's actually a pretty good rule of thumb. If you're getting dressed for Halloween, in a couple of weeks, just ask yourself that question. How differently would I have to dress if I was going like a whore? If the answer is not much, go get dressed again. But, someone might say, well, that's slut-shaming. Okay, but, it depends what you mean. I think it's a shameful thing to be a slut, and one ought to be ashamed to act like a prostitute acts. Okay, with that said, obviously, it would be inappropriate and unhelpful and even sinful to seek to embarrass somebody because of how they were dressed. If you were to shame them publicly or embarrass them, I would imagine in most circumstances that would be hugely inappropriate. And I can only try to understand how many women feel who have been sort of judged critically or embarrassed publicly. And so I know that there is I know that this is a needle that needs to be threaded and it can be difficult to do. But we're going to try to do it. And just so you know, I've put 3 links in the description below from 3 lovely Catholic women speaking about modesty. So if you're a woman and just the idea of having some Australian bloke talk about modesty and directing it at women in any way, shape, or form is super offensive to you, you could maybe just quit this right now and just go see what the ladies have to say. Because honestly, what they had to say is lovely. All right. Let me begin by saying this. It seems to me that there are certain scripture passages that we find very difficult to obey or even to take seriously. And it seems to me that you can tell if that's the case by seeing how quickly you want to dismiss that commandment. All right, so for example, in Matthew 5:39, right, our blessed Lord says, if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. And whenever you hear sermons about this or commentary on this, you usually hear what it doesn't mean. Jesus is not saying, or here's what Christians get wrong about this. But then very often they never tell you what Christ meant. I mean, surely he meant something. He wasn't just saying something that didn't mean anything. What did he mean? Or in Ephesians 5, where St. Paul says, wives, submit yourselves to your husbands. Well, here's what he doesn't mean. And don't get me wrong, that can be helpful. You don't want people getting the wrong idea. It's kind of like when Catholics say we pray to Mary. Okay, here's what we don't mean. But you have to follow up by saying what you do mean. I mean, clearly this means something. What does it mean? Or in 1 Corinthians 7:5, when St. Paul is talking about husbands and wives not denying the marital embrace, sex to each other. He says, don't do it. Well, here's what he's not saying. Yeah, great. What is he saying, right? And this is true in my own life. When people talk about swearing's always been something I have struggled with. I think it's because it was a bad habit that I got into early on in life, and it's something I'm trying to eradicate from my speech. But for the longest time, I've tried to make excuses. When someone's like, well, you shouldn't curse. I'm like, okay, well, define cursing. And also, different words have meant different things in different times. And I'm trying to get out of it. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, if our first reaction to something the church teaches is to try to get out of it, I think there's a problem with us there. That's an issue of pride. And I don't think we want to do that. We want to be docile to the teachings of the church. We may not fully understand all the implications of a particular command or a particular virtue, but we should at least want to know. All right, so that brings us to modesty. It seems to me that when the topic of modesty is brought up, it's often quickly dismissed. People will say something like, oh, well, yeah, okay, but modesty means different things in different times and places. And so, okay, well, that's true. but it still means something. So instead of dismissing it and thinking yourself, well, I can get out of this, maybe try to see how we can live and dress and act and move in a modest way. Okay, I want to begin by sharing a quotation from the Catechism of the Catholic Church before we look at what the angelic doctor, Thomas Aquinas, has to say. Okay, so here's how the Catechism of the Catholic Church talks about modesty. It says purity, right, sexual purity, requires modesty, an integral part of temperance. Modesty protects the intimate center of the person. It means refusing to unveil what should remain hidden. It is ordered to chastity, to whose sensitivity it bears witness. It guides how one looks at others and behaves towards them in conformity with the dignity of persons and their solidarity. So we could talk about modesty in a way that doesn't actually have to do with clothing, right? Refusing to unveil what should remain hidden. So if somebody shares something with me in confidence and then I go about telling everybody about this thing, I'm speaking immodestly. I'm revealing what ought to be hidden. And we dress modestly, or we ought to dress modestly, in order to veil what demands the reverence. Okay, so that's what the Catechism of the Catholic Church has to say about modesty. I want to say one more thing before we look at what Thomas Aquinas has to say. I was with some friends one morning at their house, and they were dressing their kids for school, and some of their children were teenagers. And the mother was saying how frustrated she is about all this modesty talk that the school was saying. And she was frustrated that it never applied to men. It's always about women. Okay, certainly men can dress immodestly. But given what men and women in our society typically wear, it seems to me to make perfect sense why a lot of this does fall on women. Like, if dudes were wearing kilts and you sometimes saw their underwear, there'd be a lot of talk about, I don't know, it would be, kilts, underwear, whatever. But hopefully they're wearing underwear. It's like, you'd be like, dude, it needs to be just above the knees, because when you cross your legs, Frank, I can see your breakfast. So it seems to me that, when women are wearing skirts, I've given talks at many high schools, and sometimes I'll be giving a talk and someone will I can see their underwear, and I actually many times feel physically repulsed by this. I'm like, oh, for the love, Same thing would be true of men if men wore skirts. Okay, there are other things we could point out too. I'm not going to get into the ins and outs of particular dress. I'm going to let you hash that out in the comments section. But I just wanted to throw that out there as well. I don't think it's a sexist thing to think that, okay, when it comes to dressing in our society, men and women dress differently. And often, because of what women can wear in this society, it can be more conducive to, say, the lust of somebody else's lust or temptation to lust. And we should be concerned about that. We are our brother's keeper. And so, all right, I'm going to shut up and just read what Thomas Aquinas has to say. Are you ready? Here's what he says. I'll save that one till let's do this one first. So this one comes from Thomas Aquinas' commentary on the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 5, where Jesus says, if you look at a woman lustfully, right? And he talks about how we should not lust. Then he quotes Chrysostom. Aquinas quotes Chrysostom. Here you go. Chrysostom says also that women who adorn themselves in order to be lusted after sin mortally. If someone opens a pit or digs a pit and does not cover it, and an ox or ass should fall in, the owner of the pit shall pay the price. Exodus 21:33. And if no one lusts after her, it must be said that she sins mortally, like a person who prepares poison, even if it were not consumed by the one it was intended for. Still, the person preparing it sins mortally because he did what he could to kill him. I want to just pause a moment and just kind of remind us that we should not be quick to dismiss the wisdom of the saints. We may wish to clarify, and certainly saints weren't infallible, right? Certainly they said things that were false or wrong, or even could have said them differently. But I think, again, as a humble son or as a humble daughter of the church, I may not want to hear this. It may strike me as odd. But, I mean, look at the pagan society in which we live. I mean, we live in a pornified culture. The idea that that hasn't influenced how we dress in a negative way is insane. So it shouldn't surprise us that the advice from the saints and doctors of the church should strike us as against the sort of sentiments of the world. It ought to, and I think we should be submissive to it. All right, Thomas Aquinas says this, "But those women who have no husband," and I just want you to know, just in case someone's getting angry because this is all about women, at the very end of this, he says this also applies to men. Right, so what he's saying to women, he applies to men as well. But he says, "But those women who have no husband, nor wish to have one, or who are in a state of life inconsistent with marriage, cannot without sin desire to give lustful pleasure to those men who see them, because this is to incite them to sin. And if they adorn themselves with this intention of adorn themselves, very often it's like the removal of adornment, but of provoking others to lust, they sin mortally. Whereas if they do so from frivolity and from vanity for the sake of ostentation, it is not always mortal, but sometimes venial, and the same applies to men in this respect." All right, here's another quote from Thomas Aquinas. This is going to be great. As for any feminists watching, because you're just going to love it, "As regards the adornment of women, we must bear in mind something special, namely that a woman's apparel may incite men to lust. According to Proverbs 7:10, 'Behold, a woman meeteth him in harlot's attire, prepared to deceive souls.' But then Thomas says, 'Nevertheless, a woman may use means to please her husband, lest through despising her he fall into adultery.'" Now, don't misunderstand Thomas Aquinas. Aquinas is not saying that a man is ever justified in committing adultery. Adultery is a grave sin that will send you to hell. And if a man commits mortal sin and he says, "Well, my wife kind of never really dressed well for me, she let herself go," it's not going to kind of get you off the hook. But that said, we ought to desire to dress in a way that is pleasing to our spouse. Yes, we should do that. So if you're a woman, you ought to dress in a way that pleases your husband, and if you're a husband, likewise. Hence it is written in 1 Corinthians 7:34, "The woman that is married thinketh on the things of the world, how she may please her husband. Whereof, if a married woman adorn herself in order to please her husband, she can do this without sin." All right. I want to conclude by reading two quotes, one from St. Ambrose and one from St. Jerome, both doctors of the church, both ancient saints, because I think they're two very helpful quotations. Then in the comment section below, I'd love to hear from you as to how we can dress modestly. Because I, like many people, get turned off by those who are very judgmental of those around them and even speak critically about someone's dress they don't even know, you know. So people can be jerks for sure. And no doubt there'll be men in this comment section who are just jerks. And they'll say things that are uncharitable and self-righteous, and that's on them. But we shouldn't be so turned off by sinners who are self-righteous and pharisaical and whatever else. We shouldn't be turned off by them to the extent that we then throw out the virtue of modesty. We're not allowed to do that. So again, if you're a woman watching this and you're turned off by a dude trying to talk about modesty, there are 3 videos in the description below. One from Jackie Francois, one from Emily Wilson, who's terrific and has a lovely, really excellent YouTube channel, I think, and Leah Darrow. So you might go check them out. All right, here's what St. Ambrose said. "Modesty should pervade all that is exterior, our walk, our gestures, and our movements. All outside appearances reveal the condition of our mind. Although our passions are hidden, they manifest themselves exteriorly. One easily knows if a man is fickle, haughty, mischievous, or if he is wise, patient, and reserved. The motion of the body is a species of voice which bespeaks all that is passing in the soul. Modesty is suitable for all ages and for all classes of persons, for all times and places. Right? So the body has a language. I was talking to my daughter the other day about terms and how terms convey concepts. Because a concept is the intellectual abstraction of the essence of a thing. So if I say beaver, I'm trying to convey a semi-aquatic, broad-tailed rodent. If I say table, I'm trying to convey a flat surface that's raised above. It's difficult to do it with artificial objects. That's raised somewhat above the ground and is designed for putting things on. Right? When I use words, I'm trying to convey a concept. And when we dress, how we walk, how we dance, how we use our body, without even using the voice, we're expressing something. This is a sign that conveys something, he's saying. All right, here's Jerome. Further, we must speak as we dress and dress as we speak. Why do we profess one thing and display another? A tongue talks of chastity, but the whole body reveals incontinence. All right, so to wrap up, I would say this. I understand that this is a difficult topic to talk about, and it's difficult in part because of the way it's sometimes been conveyed to men and women, especially women, and I would say because of the pride of women who are not willing to listen to the wisdom of the saints and even, the apostles. Those are, I think, two reasons. We should not be turned off on the topic of modesty because of how it's being conveyed or because we've encountered people we consider to be self-righteous, pharisaical, arrogant, and shaming. That's on them, and maybe they need to be rebuked privately and they need to repent of doing that. But we shouldn't be so turned off that we then throw out the issue of modesty. We shouldn't look at the scriptures that talk about modesty and only talk about what they don't mean. We should recognize that we ought to dress and act and speak modestly, and that this is true of men and of women. There you go. Let me know what you think in the description below. Not the description, the comment section. Also, I'm interviewing the Babylon Bee today. You know those two fellows from the Babylon Bee? I'll be interviewing them later on today. Should be fun. So if you're not yet subscribed to the channel, would you please do that? Click subscribe, click the bell button. That way Google has to notify you whenever we put out a new video and you won't miss all the cool stuff that we got coming. Thanks.